Commissioner Blair on the birth of his, I believe, fourth child on Monday. I think it really shows his dedication to the NCPC that he has abandoned his wife and large family to join us for what promises to be a barn burner of a meeting. I'd also like to report on a delegated item that I took action on this month. Certain authorities were delegated to me by the Commission on March 6, 2025. I approved the transfer of jurisdiction of lands earlier this month from the National Park Service to the District of Columbia Department of Transportation. The transferred issue is for 2 areas of land currently under the jurisdiction of NPS within Anacostia Park. The transfers will allow DDOT to reconstruct the existing Anacostia Avenue Bridge over the former Pepco Station cooling water inlet with 2 12-foot travel lanes and a new 10-foot wide sidewalk. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the report of the Executive Director, Marcel Acosta.
Thank you, Chair Scharf, and good afternoon. I just have one item today. We bid farewell to urban planner Brittany Drakeford, who joined NCPC in 2022 and served with us for 4 years. Brittany served as NCPC's representative to the DC Board of Zoning Adjustments and contributed to the Making DC Safe and Beautiful initiative, the Comprehensive Plan Update, Commemoration Planning, and our internship program. We thank Brittany for her many contributions to the agency and wish her the best as she completes her doctoral dissertation in urban and regional planning at the University of Maryland. And I look forward to calling her Dr. Brittany Drakeford soon. You have my written reports in your packets, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Marcel. Do any commissioners have any questions for our Executive Director? I will just echo Marcel's sentiments, wishing Brittany best of luck as she hopefully concludes her doctorate, and thank her for her service to this commission. Agenda item 6 is our legislative update from our Secretary and esteemed General Counsel, Megan Hoddle-Cox. Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While there has been some movement on relevant legislation this month, none of it's time sensitive. So given the length of today's agenda, I will provide a detailed update on pending legislation to the Commission next month. But I'm happy to answer any questions if commissioners have any.
Thank you, Megan. Do any commissioners have questions or comments for Megan at this time? Seeing none, we'll proceed to agenda item 7. Which is our unfinished business from our last meeting. You may recall that when we closed our last meeting in March, we had a pending motion on the floor, which was a motion to approve preliminary and final site and building plans for the East Wing Modernization Project. That motion was made by Commissioner Dixon and seconded by Commissioner Schaefer and unanimously tabled for consideration at today's meeting. Before we get started, I do want to address Judge Leon's preliminary injunction in the lawsuit brought by the National Trust for Historic Preservation regarding this project. As I read that injunction, that is which is, I should say, stayed for the next 2 weeks, which also includes ample exclusions to allow for some continued construction on the site. That order really does not impact our action here today. The NCPC is not a party to that lawsuit. The injunction doesn't speak to the NCPC review process. From my perspective, we have a project before us. We've been asked to review it, and that's really our job here today. And if there's no further objection or if there's no further desire to comment on Judge Leon's order, we'll move past that and continue our consideration of the East Wing Modernization Project at this time. The second note I would have before we begin our deliberations on this subject, as the Commission may be aware, as the Commission is aware, after our March meeting, there were a number of updates to that project. Most notably, the project applicants have now eliminated the stairs adjacent to the south portico of the proposed ballroom and have also modified the southwest corner stair to include a switchback. NCPC staff provided a brief addendum explaining the changes to the Commission yesterday, which was also posted on our website. Overall, the layout, other than those 2 modifications, is not substantially different than what we previously considered. And I will say that the proposed revisions actually do reflect a lot of the feedback that the project applicants heard from NCPC at that meeting. NCPC staff is of the opinion that this constitutes a significant improvement to the project, which will help preserve the hierarchy of the south elevation of the executive residence. and just generally improve the view sheds and I'd say symbolic. I'm trying to pick my words carefully here. The symbolic nature of the south portico of the White House as it currently stands. Therefore, before we move into deliberation on this project as a whole, I'd like to move for an amendment to the original motion that we currently have on the floor by suggesting that we add the following to the commission action here as suggested in the staff addendum, which was previously circulated. And that addition is that we note that the applicant has updated the project design to eliminate the stairs extending from the south portico and modify the stairs at the southwest corner of the project to include a switchback, and that the staff supports the proposed project updates, particularly the removal of the south portico stair, which will help reinforce the south elevation of the executive mansion as the primary facade. With that being my motion, I'd ask at this time for a second.
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Levenbach. Is there any discussion on this item or questions on this item before we proceed to voting on this amendment to the EDR? This is obviously not the vote or deliberations on the project as a whole, but merely on this amendment to the EDR. Seeing no questions or comments, Madam Secretary, can you please confirm the amendment motion and second and take the vote by roll call?
Yes, the amendment motion was made by Chairman Scharf and seconded by Vice Chairman Levenbach. Commissioner Solisas? Commissioner Stidham?
Yes.
Commissioner Argo?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Levenbach?
Yes.
Chairman Scharf?
Yes.
Commissioner Blair?
Yes.
Administrator Forst?
Yes.
Commissioner Dixon?
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson? Commissioner Henderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Giacchetti? Commissioner Giacchetti?
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. The amended motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that, I'll now open it up to the Commission for discussion on the amended motion to approve preliminary and final site and building plans for the East Wing Modernization Project with the language we just added incorporated into the EDR. I'd actually like to start discussion today. And I'd like to start off just by reading some relevant press clippings. First, from the Washington Post, this attempt to modernize the White House has destroyed its historic value. Second, from the New York Times, a sacrifice of history for convenience. Also from the Times, extravagance for a public building. And lastly, from the Telegraph, a prioritization of grandeur over the needs of ordinary citizens. Now, none of these quotes relate to the ballroom project now before us. The first of these was about Teddy Roosevelt's construction of the West Wing. The second was about the Nixon-era construction of the press room in the West Colonnade. The third was actually about Chester A. Arthur's 1880s renovations of the Executive Mansion. And the fourth was about Andrew Jackson's construction of the North Portico to the Executive Mansion in 1830. Criticism and sky-is-falling pronouncements from so-called historic preservationists and their allies in the press are therefore nothing new to the history of the White House. While some might wish for history and the world to stand still, the fact of the matter is that the White House complex has constantly evolved to meet the programmatic needs of the federal government and the office of the president which it houses. And it is in that context in which I believe we must now review the ballroom project that is before this commission. I believe that in time, this ballroom will be considered every bit as much of a national treasure as the other key components of the White House. And I believe that in time, the nation and successive presidents of both parties and all political stripes long into the future will be grateful to President Trump for having initiated and brought this project into being. I'd like to speak to our process on this particular project. As chairman of this commission, which has a lineage and history dating back over a century, I feel very strongly about the fact that the work that we do is important, and I feel that we have been unfairly slighted in the press and otherwise for the way we've gone about reviewing this particular project. The NCPC has a professional staff that I've come to know and recognize as doing consistently exceptional work as they and we as a commission go about our job of protecting and preserving the aspects of the capital region that make it a particular public treasure for our great nation. And the notion that we've been less than thorough, that we have not met our obligations, is frankly insulting to the work that our team has done. on this project and by implication on so many others as well. So let me lay out that process now. We began formal consultations with the White House's project team in December. I was at one of those first meetings where we discussed project goals, project timelines, and where the core interests of this commission were advocated for quite vigorously. Our staff engaged with the project team, as we do on so many projects, and the overall project now before us began to take shape. In January, 3 months ago, the White House team, represented by Office of Administration Director Josh Fisher and lead architect Shalom Baranis, gave an extensive public presentation on the project and what they were looking to build and achieve. We gave substantial feedback. Members of this commission had the opportunity to express the concerns and qualms that some of them had, and I would note that many members of this commission were also fulsome with their praise for the project's goals and ultimate objective. I thought Shalom Baranis was quite compelling in addressing the concerns that were raised and addressing questions about the design choices made and the nature of the project at issue. After the January meeting, we set out to devise a schedule that would allow for a full and fair review of the ballroom project. I was guided in setting out that schedule by the professional staff at the NCPC, who obviously have a lot of experience in these matters, as well as by my fellow members of the executive committee of this commission, Vice Chairman Stuart Levenbach and Commissioner Arrington Dixon. As our longest serving member, I leaned on Commissioner Dixon in particular for his views on what was appropriate, and we as a team ended up deferring to our staff's recommended review timeline, balancing the need and our desire for a comprehensive public comment period with our reciprocal desire to not unnecessarily hold up a priority project for our partners at the White House. Last month at our March meeting, the White House team presented again. We saw in many respects that our feedback had been heard and had an impact. The removal of the south pediment of the proposed ballroom was, for example, in my view, a great improvement on the original design that we had seen, reducing the massing of the proposed ballroom significantly and improving the coherence of the architecture of the new project with the executive mansion itself. The White House team was also very responsive to our stated concerns by showing, for example, that taking into account plantings in the tree line from the south, that the core public view of the iconic south facade of the executive mansion, the portico, the Truman balcony, etc., would remain largely unchanged and undiminished from crucial vantage points, and that the prominence of the north portico of the executive mansion was being preserved as well to the extent possible. And prior to this meeting, amended plans shown to us by the White House, in which we've now incorporated into the motion before us, further reflect the public comments and our feedback. The south ceremonial and largely non-functional staircase has been removed, reducing the footprint of the ballroom significantly and markedly improving sightlines. I would also note that since December, our commission staff has consistently emphasized to the White House team the need for an improved public pedestrian experience when visiting the area in and around the White House. It appears that those concerns have also been heard, as we now have plans submitted to us, which we will hear more about later today, for a new visitor's entrance to the White House. Since 1994, in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing, the White House has steadily become, because of very real security concerns, more and more walled off from the general public by an expanding complex of unsightly security barriers and fencing. With the White House's visitor center submission, we are seeing the most significant, concerted, real efforts to restore public view sheds and improve the pedestrian experience around the White House in 3 decades. And I like to think that the NCPC has been part of the impetus for action on that front. After the formal presentations in March, commissioners had the opportunity to ask questions and comment, and we then heard public testimony for many hours. I want to emphasize that everyone who wanted to be heard on this project was heard. We did not require in-person testimony as we could have. We heard from folks all over the country, and even a presentation from a couple of well-meaning, if rather misguided, engineers from Venezuela who proposed a massive geodesic freedom dome on the South Lawn, which for the record I do not support. I commend so many members of this commission for sitting through the many hours of testimony and thoughtfully considering the testimony that we heard. I want to note that we would have been within our rights as a commission to immediately vote on the ballroom at that point. Indeed, we had a seconded motion on the floor at that time. Instead, we held that motion over to give us more time to properly consider the matter before us in light of the testimony and the materials that we had before us. I have now personally read every single comment submitted to this commission. That has not been a simple or a quick task, but as chairman, I thought it was my duty. I heard every minute of public testimony on this project. I've reviewed our staff's recommendations, and I've reviewed the project materials submitted to us at great length. I should note that many of the negative comments that were submitted to us during this process were frankly unresponsive. They dealt with issues beyond the scope of this commission. The private funding of the ballroom, for instance, or interior decorations, or the demolition process, or were simply opinions on the president himself. Considering issues of this sort is not within our mandate. We are not some sort of free-ranging ballroom justice commission. A great many of the negative comments we received were also copies or variations on a number of what I found to be unhelpful form letters circulated by groups that oppose the ballroom. While I always commend members of the public for engaging with civic processes, I would have preferred to hear unvarnished views as opposed to picked over uninformed language repeated hundreds or thousands of times. I took much more seriously the number of serious architectural critiques that we received. Some were from noted architects, others from simply interested members of the public who took the time to send us their thoughts and comments. And to those members of the public, I thank you, and I want to assure you that I considered your views before coming to my decision today. Today, I will be voting in favor of this project, and I want to explain why. In doing so, I hope my fellow commissioners will indulge me. I think it would be instructive to discuss the actual architectural history of the White House and the White House complex in order to properly contextualize the project that we have before us. And in doing so, I believe that I will address many of the public and architectural concerns that we've received during this process. In 1792, President George Washington and then Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson launched a design competition to design what was then called the President's House. The submission that won out was that of James Hoban. It was inspired, many say, by Leinster House in Dublin, one of the greatest examples of 18th century Georgian architecture in Ireland, with Palladian elements particularly prominent. Design and construction did not end with Hoban, though, by a very long shot. And indeed, if you look at the White House today, it bears very little resemblance to the original Hoban design. Jefferson, who had criticized the White House previously as big enough for, quote, 2 emperors, 1 pope, and the Grand Lama in the bargain, on taking office actually quickly saw a need for expansion. He added colonnades to house various service spaces that would otherwise have been in outbuildings, significantly expanding the original footprint of the White House. Shortly thereafter, of course, the building was substantially burned to the ground by the British during the War of 1812, for which I've still not forgiven them, requiring total reconstruction. And the building that was rebuilt thereafter quickly departed from the relatively simple original Hoban design. James Monroe added the south portico. Andrew Jackson, very controversially, as I alluded to before, added the north portico in 1830. These 2 imposing classical design elements were roundly criticized for their cost and extravagance in their day, but are now perhaps the defining architectural features of the White House. Sprouting up next to the White House, of course, a short while later was the imposing edifice of the Treasury Building. Growing from a relatively small classical structure begun in 1836 to the massive 4 wings that it encompasses today by 1869, the Treasury grew to dwarf in footprint and massing the White House that it sat beside. During the same time period, the continued viability of the White House as the presidential residence and seat of government was repeatedly called into question for many reasons, but including the fact that it just simply wasn't big enough. Both before and after the Civil War, there were numerous proposals to move or to substantially rebuild the White House, but none of these were pursued. What occurred instead was simply sprawl. The complex started growing in a largely disorganized and ad hoc fashion. On the west side of the White House, for instance, connected to the West Colonnade, massive greenhouses and conservatories grew and grew and grew, until indeed several decades later, by the turn of the 20th century, their footprint rivaled the Executive Mansion, dwarfing any comparable structures on the east side of the building short of the Treasury, and were considered a vital and historic part of the White House complex. Indeed, as a side point, those who speak today about the historical symmetry of the White House as it relates to the ballroom proposal are essentially speaking about a fictional history of the building, not present since the very earliest days of our republic. The White House complex as a whole has never been symmetrical, since perhaps the 1830s, if even then. And then whether it was the burgeoning Treasury Department to one side or the greenhouse facilities on the other, the White House complex in its first century grew in fits and spurts. and it has continued to do so until the present day. Beginning in 1871, rising just to the west of the conservatories and greenhouses, was a new massive addition to the complex. The State War and Navy building, now called the EEOB, dwarfs the White House, overtopping and literally overshadowing it. With little in the way of architectural coherence with the White House and Treasury, its Second Empire styling and design was roundly criticized. Mark Twain called it the ugliest building in America. Henry Adams called it an architectural insane asylum. Franklin Delano Roosevelt considered a near total redesign of its facade, as it was still reviled as an architectural atrocity in his time. Today, of course, views differ significantly, and most consider it to be quite beautiful, if somewhat discordant with the White House. By 1892, the White House complex was such a mess, and so clearly underbuilt given the demands of the presidency at that time, that Benjamin Harrison and his formidable wife Caroline proposed a total redesign of the complex, adding diagonal connectors on the east and west of the executive mansion, connecting to two massive halls on either side, equal in size to the executive mansion, that could contain office space, entertaining space, galleries for art and historical artifacts. This plan was never implemented, but it shows that certainly by 1892, the same arguments being made for the ballroom, the same needs being identified, were an issue for the presidency. Proceeding into the 20th century, we get Teddy Roosevelt, who demolished the half-century-old greenhouses and conservatories, drawing intense public ire in doing so, and threw up office space to the west of the West Colonnade, forming what is today the West Wing, or at least the roots of the West Wing. Roosevelt also built a small East Wing to serve as an entrance and cloakroom, which was later largely demolished in the 1940s before being rebuilt. The West Wing grew under Hoover, burned down, was rebuilt, and then FDR effectively tripled its size, adding 2 floors and what is now the Oval and Cabinet Suite to the south of the West Wing. FDR also added a swimming pool under the West Colonnade. Truman tore the entire White House interior down to its studs, substantially rebuilding it, and for good measure added the Truman balcony to the south facade, for which he was, of course, roundly condemned. Kennedy added the Situation Room complex, a large addition to the south of the West Wing. Nixon put a press room in where the swimming pool was, again drawing public condemnation. I could go on and on and on. My core point is that the White House is ever-changing, ever-evolving, to meet the programmatic needs of an ever-changing and evolving United States presidency. And any argument that relies on the idea that the White House is unchangeable, or should be unchangeable, flies in the face of the very history of the structure such critics claim they are trying to protect. And so we arrive at the latest project to be proposed as an addition to the White House, the ballroom to be built on the site of the old East Wing. Since at least the Harrison administration, and you could make the argument since the days of Andrew Jackson, there has been a recognized need for a large entertaining and event space on the White House complex. Modern presidents have accommodated this programmatic need for large events by erecting unsightly tents on the oft-swampy land of the South Lawn. Nobody can argue that this is a good idea or that it befits the presidency of the greatest and most powerful country that has ever existed in history. We've been told by the White House project team and by architect Shalom Baranas that they are looking to build a ballroom that can seat 1,000, while also accommodating the needs of the presidency: security, ingress, egress, room for various ceremonies, etc. We typically defer to applicants when they define their programmatic needs. That's as true for this project as it is for a parking garage or a cellular tower or any number of other projects that regularly come before this commission. But I will note that the Washington Hilton seats over twice as many in its ballroom. 1,000 is not an unreasonable number programmatically, and not an unreasonable amount of space, especially given that presumably many events to be held there might have fewer people, but require space for entertainment, a dais for speeches, room for displays, and require substantial space for visiting dignitaries. The proposed ceiling is high, but I would think that a ballroom for the president, and indeed for the United States, for the most important civic events in our country, befits a high ceiling. Some of the architectural critiques we received have focused on the kitchen, which is currently to be at ground level. Some have suggested that if the kitchen were moved underground, the entire height of the structure could be reduced significantly. We've also been told, however, by the project team that subterranean construction is simply not possible, owing to other programmatic needs below grade. And I want to speak very carefully here. The president has spoken publicly to an extent about what is being built below the ballroom. And for obvious reasons, I will not go further than he has on the subject. But I will note that there are sealed entries on the docket of the court case brought against the ballroom project by the National Trust. And I think it is therefore safe for the public and for this commission to assume that these subterranean programmatic needs are serious and unmovable, and as noted in public docket entries related to national security. It is, of course, also public record that FDR built an emergency bunker beneath the old East Wing, for which he was actually criticized at the time. Other critiques that we have received have emphasized personal animus towards President Trump, that he is simply building a ballroom for his own use. I will note, though, that even if the current construction timeline holds, as I expect it will, President Trump will get very limited use of this structure before the end of his term, and that the real beneficiaries will be future presidents of all political stripes and dispositions and their administrations, as well as, of course, the American people. The ballroom, as proposed, while large, fits neatly into the White House complex, nestled as it is between the Executive Mansion and the much larger Treasury building. It does not overtop and overshadow the Executive Mansion, as does the Eisenhower building, and its neoclassical architecture matches and complements the neoclassical elements of the Executive Mansion, in contrast again to the Eisenhower building with its Second Empire features. I've spoken at length about the history of the White House today. I've done so because perhaps the only constant in the history of the White House is that practically every change, every modification, every addition, and indeed every feature that we now celebrate as an iconic aspect of the White House was roundly and viciously condemned in its day. The critiques of the ballroom today are therefore oddly familiar to those of us who have studied the White House and its surroundings. Just as the north and south porticos, the West Wing, the Truman balcony, and every other aspect of the White House are now celebrated, I believe too, in time, the ballroom will be celebrated as a crucial and contributing aspect of the White House complex. And as I said previously, I intend to support it today. Commissioner Blair.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, how can I follow that? Now have a good history of the White House. I would just say, obviously, I think the team has worked very hard to make this a good and beautiful structure. I agree that the president will get very limited use. I think it's worth noting that the architect of this structure, who I think is here with us today, is a renowned architect that has contributed a lot to the city and region and has won countless awards for his work. I think his firm has received 250 or so awards over its 4 decades based on my research. And he can correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably more, including some of the most prestigious awards in architecture. He was one of the youngest fellows of the American Institute of Architects ever admitted, which is a standout of his record. And I won't go through all of the buildings in the area that they have participated in, but all of the top level awards you can win in architecture, pretty much he's won and his firm has won. And I think to treat this project as different or somehow not from the same lineage of art and artistic design, simply because there are some people who I think for clearly political reasons don't like the project, is a shame. And I think it is an unfair besmirching of the architect. Further, the president, who obviously has had a hand in this design, is a builder himself. And he too has won numerous architecture designs and architecture awards for buildings he has built over the years, as well as hospitality awards and many others. So I think that's worth noting because the purpose of the ballroom really blends the two things. It blends great architecture with great hospitality, which is something the president cares deeply about because it represents the American people. That's what the White House does. It's not his house. He is the current occupant, but it is the American people's house, and he feels that way. And as I've said in my comments previously, the goal of this is to be able to give the American people or visitors, the King of England will be here at the end of the month, and we will likely dine in tents. When the president was recently in the United Kingdom, they dined in Windsor Castle. It's a little bit different. And, we would say that it is not fitting of the presidency or the White House to have to invite the king of our oldest ally and perhaps most loyal ally to come and eat in tents on the White House lawn. They deserve a better experience. I think that the public comment was well heard, despite the obvious campaigns that were, I would say, unserious in their critiques of the architecture of the project itself and more political in nature. I think all of the real feedback has been well considered. I think that perhaps we'll hear some differences today, but I think it's been well considered. I think it's clear that the team that has been on this project cares about what this commission thinks and has worked hard with it, as well as any project that has happened certainly during my time here, as any other team has. And so with that, I think we should all support this project. I will certainly be supporting this project, and I will yield further comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair. Administrator Forrest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and our fellow commissioners. I think this project is absolutely appropriate and logical. We're all familiar with our president's constitutional roles, but our president is also the convener in chief of the United States and the most powerful in the world. Would we have done more with appropriately sized and framework space over the decades and centuries? I surely believe so. Until now, we've convened as we can, probably not convened as we should. That's world leaders, business leaders, athletic, scientific, technical. We've retained a notable, federally accomplished architect. We've sourced the capital 100% from private pay. The attention to detail, I think, seems exquisite. And we talk about an accelerated process. We all know things take as long as we let them. 97 days ago, when I was sworn in as the administrator of GSA, we launched Project 410. It's our North Star. It took 410 days to build the entirety of the Empire State Building. Things do take as long as we let them. I've every confidence this is going to be magnificent. We're going to wonder why we didn't do it earlier. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll also be supporting this with a firm yes.
Thank you, Administrator Forrest. Commissioner Dixon.
Mr. Chairman, I have no comments at this time. I'll pass.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mendelson.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with a question, which I think is to Mr. Acosta. I received a note earlier today that some of the president's statements and renderings regarding the ballroom are not consistent with what we have before us today. I don't know if that's correct. Do you know? And is what we're voting on, is that what is binding or what the president has been speaking or describing?
Sure. So I can answer that, Chairman Mendelson. The motion that the chairman gave at the beginning regarding the addendum to the EDR that was circulated to commissioners and posted on our website yesterday incorporates the updated design that had been shared and that we received the information on that from the project architect and applicant team. And so what is with the amended motion, assuming the motion passes the commission today, it would be the updated plans that have been circulated that the commission is approving.
Regardless of public statements that might be somewhat different.
The
public statements by the president.
What is before the commission to be approved is the updated plans that were shared.
Okay.
That includes the removal of the southern staircase, which you previously criticized, sir, and the addition of the southwest switchbacks there.
Yes, no, I understand. I looked at it. I just wanted to understand clearly what the commission has before it. So I have a number of comments. I'm going to see if I can have these somewhat organized. The issue to me is not whether there should be a ballroom. And I think a lot of the comments here have been about whether there should be a ballroom. I don't think that's it. It's the design. And I don't think the issue is that, well, other changes to the White House have been criticized, and therefore the critiques here are not justified. I'm sure there have been a lot of other proposals for the White House that were in fact not adopted. What we have before us is this proposal, and whether this proposal is acceptable or the best it can be. I have previously spoken to the issue of time and consideration. I recognize that spending 2 years on a fence is an awful long time. And it does seem to me that it could happen more quickly. I'm looking at Administrator Force. On the other hand, we've had this for maybe 3 months. Our first discussion, I believe, was at the January meeting. And I think there's a lot of value to the iterative process, and we've not had that. I'm reminded of some testimony that was submitted. I'm going to paraphrase it. We don't have to choose between respecting our history for the American people and accommodating modern government's needs. In the case of the East Wing Modernization Project, we can do both. Doing both, however, requires time, and that we move deliberately, that we engage seriously with ideas offered by the tens of thousands of architects, planners, scholars, and patriotic citizens who've submitted comments. It is possible to build a 1,000-person ballroom that, unlike the plan currently under review, truly honors the iconic status, the primacy, and the historic significance of the People's House. Comments submitted show how this could be done. The resulting ballroom would be smaller, and it would hold 1,000 people for a seated dinner. It would be lower in height, and it would still accommodate the functions proposed in the current plan. It would respect the building's original architectural style, and by retaining the historic access along Pennsylvania Avenue between the Capitol and the White House, it would preserve the material representation of the symbolic connection between the legislative and executive branches in a nation committed to representative government and public accountability. This consultative process exists for a reason. To borrow words of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, words that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch used to describe our legislative process, it enables us to tap the combined wisdom of many, not just that of a rushed process. So I had brought up, I think it was at the January or February meeting, concern about the demolition. It was pointed out that the NCPC's general counsel has said the NCPC does not have jurisdiction over reviewing demolition. I'm not going to argue that, but the fact that it was demolished atypically before plans were presented means that the iterative process was more fixed. I look at the EDR, I don't see any analysis of the square footage needs. I don't see any analysis of why the structure can't be lowered. We're told for security reasons, perhaps that's correct, but there's just no analysis. I think that we can have a ballroom. To me, that's not the issue. And I would also just note parenthetically that I think much of the criticism is because of who is the president. I don't think that's what's before, or I'll say that is not what is before us. But I do think that the height of the ballroom, when I asked that of the architect at the last meeting, I didn't get a persuasive answer that the height needed to be 40 feet. It could be 39, 38, 37, 36 feet. I didn't see the analysis of that. And to me, that's what is the issue here, is that this addition is, when I look at what was circulated yesterday, the addendum, I mean, I'm trying to be nice here. It's just too large. It's just too large. And if we can get the same program, but not as tall, not competing in height with the main structure, and a condensed footprint, we are better for that. I think of the visitor center at the Capitol. That's a huge addition. And when you stand on East Capitol Street and you look west at the Capitol, it's to me quite remarkable, the vista, the view of the Capitol, because all that was fit. That huge program, a lot of rooms, a lot of conference rooms, a lot of committee rooms, a lot of stuff. And it was done. And we've not, because this has been such a rushed process, we have not had the benefit of that iterative work. I will note the EDR talks about how, well, some of the impact of the scale and height will be mitigated by landscaping. That may be true, but to me, that is not, that's not the solution. It just isn't. Landscaping is important. Trees die, last I checked. Plantings can be moved around. To me, landscaping is great, but that is not a solution. I will add as well that I am concerned that there have been comments at our proceedings and in the public about other changes. And I've said this, I think I said this at our last meeting, I don't think we should be looking at the White House piecemeal. Today it's the ballroom. Tomorrow it could be there's some modifications to, I guess it's the colonnade between the main building and the West Wing. The day after that, it could be some addition to the West Wing. We should be looking at all of this at one time and not piecemeal. So that is a concern of mine as well. I think that the fact that this addendum to the EDR exists speaks to the value of the iterative process, that there have been changes made. I don't think they're enough. I think that if we had more time, and I can't help but wonder, but that the court action, the injunction, even though it's been stayed, would give us more time, that we would be able to see even better improvements that still protect the program. That's not the issue for me, but have a addition that is more compatible. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mendelson. Commissioner Henderson.
I have no comments at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Giacchetti.
I have no comments at this time either. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cozart. We don't have Commissioner Cozart with us. Apologies. Commissioner Solisas.
Thank you, Chairman. With the thorough work the NCPC staff has done and the improvements to the project I see today, and the important element that you made, Mr. Chairman, that the complex has to evolve. It has to evolve to meet the functioning of the administration and the White House. It's very important that it's able to do that and meet the mission requirements of the president and his staff. I think that's critical at the time too, to make sure that those things happen quickly. I think it will, as you point out, also will serve the leadership today and in the future. So with that, I support the project moving ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stidham.
Thank you, Chairman. With that, I have a statement on behalf of Secretary Brigham. I would like to read. So good afternoon. I am providing the following statement on behalf of the Secretary of Interior, Doug Burgum, regarding the Commission's final vote on the East Wing Modernization Project. The Secretary recognizes and appreciates the substantial public testimony received on this proposal. The record reflects a wide range of perspectives, including comments emphasizing historic preservation values and the symbolic importance of the White House grounds, concerns about scale, massing, and visibility from key public viewpoints, concerns about impacts to the historic landscape composition and axial views, questions about process and transparency, and from some commenters, support for improvements framed as strengthening national pride and the civic character of the Capitol. Today, the Secretary is voting in support of the project. This vote reflects the Secretary's judgment that the final design, as presented for Commission action, advances an operational need for a permanent, secure venue to support official state functions and other responsibilities of the administration, while proceeding through the Commission's established review framework that considers design, site planning, and relationship to a historic setting. As the project moves into implementation, the Secretary emphasizes the importance of continued coordination and execution consistent with the approved final design, particularly the integrated relationship among architecture, landscape, lighting, access, and circulation, as well as site edge conditions, so that the built outcome is coherent, durable, and appropriate to its national significant civic landscape.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Argo.
Thank you. I think I will make this simple. I'd like to align myself with Bill. With Commissioner Mendelson comments. which I thought were thoughtful, on point, and raised issues that we should be concerned about before what may be a rush to approve something this significant. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chairman Levenbach.
Well, thank you. First, I want to commend the chairman for the fascinating walk through history. And I think it's important because, we work on public policy issues all the time, and a lot of times you evaluate it based on the circumstances of the moment. And it's important here to evaluate this through the arc of history. And so I thought that was very important context for us. So I want to say a couple of things. One is that I appreciate the level of public interest in this proposal. The White House belongs to the American people, and it's appropriate that changes to the grounds receive careful scrutiny from this commission. But before I turn to the proposal itself, I want to briefly just note the perspective that I bring to the discussion. So I started working in the Executive Office of the President in 2007 when I joined the White House Office of Management and Budget. So my office was in the new Executive Office building, which is across the street from the White House. I have now served in the Executive Office of the President for 3 presidencies. And so I have a lot of familiarity with that corner of town. And during those years, I've attended many events at the White House, holiday receptions, meetings. I've provided countless tours for friends and family. And most recently, I attended the Hanukkah reception. I made some discussed the crowding in my earlier remarks before this commission. And that brings me to the proposal before us. So our responsibility is to ensure that the White House campus can support the modern presidency while still respecting the history of the place. And it's clear from all my experiences at the White House that it is not suited to accommodate the large numbers of guests that are indoors. The building is extraordinary, but its ceremonial spaces were designed for a much smaller scale of events than the presidency hosts today. The gatherings are often held, as many people have discussed, under temporary structures on the South Lawn, and those events require generators, staging infrastructure, catering operations, portable restroom facilities for the guests, and these installations must be assembled, secured, removed repeatedly, often with damage to the grounds. The presidency has a ballroom. The only question is whether we continue building it temporarily each time, or do we do it once properly? I listened carefully to the public's concerns about the size of the modernized East Wing, and I think the critics failed to account for 2 important aspects. So first, the White House complex sits atop an extensive network of underground infrastructure and secure facilities that support the operations of the presidency. And those constraints can significantly limit where new construction can realistically occur and shape both the placement and the ability to develop below grade. So portions of the West Wing were able to be constructed below grade. I believe some parts are even 1 story below grade. I appreciate the comment about the Capitol Visitor Center. Much of that's below grade. That type of excavation just is not capable, cannot be done in this particular location. Second, although the project is commonly referred to as a ballroom, it is actually a multi-purpose facility. The building will include space for the office of the First Lady. It will include a theater. Of course, it's got the food preparation and other necessary support for events. It also contains continuity of operations for the president that were recently highlighted. And so my reaction to the proposal is the same today as when it was originally briefed, is that this structure will vastly improve the utility of the White House compound. So I want to talk just a moment about architecture. So Thomas Jefferson was not only a president, he was one of the most thoughtful architectural minds of the founding generation. And when he served as Minister of France, he studied classical buildings and concluded that the architecture of public institutions should reflect the dignity of the Republic. So when the state of Virginia built its capital in Richmond, Jefferson rejected ordinary government designs of the time and instead modeled the structure after Maison Carrée in Nîmes, which is a Roman temple that he admired. And his belief was simple. The institutions of a great republic should be housed in buildings that convey permanence, beauty, and civic confidence. And this is not an expansion for its own sake. It is a consolidation of functions that are already occurring, but inefficiently. And if we are going to add a building to the White House grounds, it should not simply solve a logistical problem. It should also be worthy of the setting. And this proposal does both. It addresses a real operational need while contributing a building that is dignified, harmonious with its surroundings, and worthy of the White House campus and the American people. And for those reasons, I support moving forward with it.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Levenbach. Madam Secretary, can you please confirm the motion in the second and then take the vote by roll call? Yes, Commissioner.
Pass for a moment.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to discussion.
Absolutely, sir.
First, I would want to thank all the comments that were made. Particularly, I want to focus on my chairman, Mendelson's comments. I also am impressed with what you presented to us also, Mr. Chairman. You and I have had some dialogue about this issue for several weeks now. I, like you, have taken the time to look at and try to review all the comments, as many as I could at least, of the 39,000 we received. And clearly they have a leaning, and your evaluation was valid. And I appreciate that evaluation of them. I also want to associate myself with the comments of my other colleagues here. Obviously, they were well prepared, and the word should go back to President Trump that they represented him well, and they made very persuasive presentations as would be expected. I've got three choices. I can vote no, I can vote yes, or I may want to take another position, which I've been encouraged to do and thought about doing, is to basically pass at this time. Rather than, as you and I discussed earlier, about vote to maybe say, no, I told you that a long time ago and gave you a document to support it, which I'm holding in my hand now, which I will keep for reference later. But at this point, I'd like to just suggest that I support a lot of the dialogue here. And we're going to move forward, I think. Whatever I do, it's going to go forward. And hopefully we will always tell people, to the victors go the spoils. So if we are, whoever's victorious in the future will be able to enjoy this building. And maybe some of us will be at the building enjoying it and looking back and say how it got to be what it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do any other commissioners wish to be heard at this time? Hearing and seeing none, at this point, Madam Secretary, could you please confirm the motion in the second and then take the vote by roll call?
Yes, the original motion was made by Commissioner Dixon and amended by Chairman Scharf. The original motion was seconded by Commissioner Schaefer and seconded as amended by Vice Chairman Levenbach. With that, Commissioner Solisas, Commissioner Stidham,
Yes.
Commissioner Argo,
Present?
Vice Chairman Levenbach,
Yes.
Chairman Scharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Blair,
Yes.
Administrator Forst,
Yes.
Commissioner Dixon,
Present.
Chairman Mendelson,
No.
Commissioner Henderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Giacchetti.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the consent calendar. There is one item on this month's consent calendar. I see that our friends from the press don't want to stick around for the Arabian leopard exhibit. I'm very disappointed to see that, but understand, obviously. The only consent calendar item for approval is to approve comments on the draft area development plan and transportation management plan updates for the Naval Support Facility Suitland. Are there any questions or discussions on the consent calendar item from commissioners? Hearing and seeing none, we have a motion on the floor to approve the consent calendar. Do we have a second?
Second.
With a motion and a second, is there any desire to discuss this item? Hearing and seeing none, Madam Secretary, can you please confirm the motion and second and then take the vote by roll call?
Yes, the motion was made by Commissioner Dixon and seconded by Commissioner Blair. Commissioner Solisas,
Yes.
Commissioner Stidham,
Yes.
Commissioner Argo,
Present?
Vice Chairman Levenbach,
Yes.
Chairman Scharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Blair,
Yes.
Administrator Forst,
Yes.
Commissioner Dixon,
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Henderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Giacchetti.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We have 6 items on our open session calendar for today. Agenda item 9A is a request to approve preliminary site and building plans for the new stadium at RFK campus. And I believe we have Laura Shipman, who's going to be presenting